Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm reviewing the first two episodes of the show Xiaolin Showdown as a request from Lagrima Aridente. I probably didn't say that right, but I gave it my best shot. Anyway, let's get right into it. This is a show that I've heard of a little bit before, but this I've just simply never actually sat down and watched it. So it was certainly an interesting show, but let's get into it. The basic idea of Shaolin Showdown is that long ago in a distant land, I, Aku, the shape-shifting master of dark. No, wait, that's a different TV show. Anyway, is long ago in ancient times there was a battle between some great mystic kung fu warrior guy and an evil witch named uh, Wu Ya. Got my notes here. Anyway, um, the mystic kung fu guy did defeat the evil witch and imprisoned her in a little puzzle box, which is, of course, in no way, shape, or form influenced by the Hellraiser movies. But anyway, after that, he went and, with his mystical dragon friend, hid a bunch of his power items all over the world. And for thousands of years, these his disciples and that have protected the world and kept balance and all the other usual good guy junk. Well, anyway, in the modern day, of course, as you would expect, Wuya gets free and teams up with this weird kid by the name of Jack Spicer, who has a knack for building robots and dreams of world domination. So they, of Wuya, having been defeated and imprisoned in a box for 1,000 years, is basically a ghost. She can't do anything in the physical world. She only has knowledge. She needs Jack to actually go out and do things in the physical world. And of course, Jack needs her knowledge, and they basically agree that they will conquer the world and rule it together after they gather a sufficient number of the mystic kung fu guy's goodies, which are called Shengong Wus, collectively. So anyway, then we are to introduce ourselves to our heroes. We have four main characters. The first is Omi. He's a little Chinese kung fu kid who's been raised as a monk most of his life. He sort of looks between, like, he could either be the son of Lisa Simpson and Charlie Brown, or Krillin from Dragon Ball Z and Miss Pac-Man. Omi is he's very talented at martial arts, but he is completely convinced that he's better at this than anybody else out there, and that because of this, all the other kids should immediately fall into line and listen to him, which of course they have no intention of doing. Now, the second of these kids is this guy from Brazil by the name of Raimundo. He doesn't really seem to be taking a lot of their situation very seriously. He's just mostly interested in just sort of goofing around and making sure that he has a comfortable bed and all this other stuff. Next, we have the sole girl on the team. That's Kimiko. She's from Japan, and she just sort of seems to me like basically a genuinely decent natured person, but she also seems to be very spoiled, and she's always screwing around with her cell phone or various other gadgets. And finally, we have Clay, the kung fu cowboy guy from America, who just sort of takes everything at a very slow pace, goes about things in his own way. And as I said, even though this is a martial arts series, he insists on wearing a cowboy hat at all times. Because everybody in America runs around dressed as a cowboy at all times. Folks, I used to live in Texas. I lived there for the better part of a year and a half. And I got to tell you, very rarely did I actually see anybody walking around in a cowboy hat. Or even more rarely, actually decked out in full-on cowboy gear. People there dress pretty much just like everywhere else in America. Just as a little FYI to our foreign friends. So anyway, These guys are brought. These three are brought to the temple where Omi has been learning kung fu from for most of his life under the tutelage of a guy named Master Feng. And there are some other kung fu guys hanging around who mostly serve to just sort of be there. But anyway, the four kids are apparently these dragon something or other, dragon warriors, blah 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 blah, dragon fantasy stuff, cliche, blah blah blah. Anyway, each one is also tied to one of the four elements from the Western magical tradition, even though this show is mostly steeped in Eastern mysticism. But hey, Avatar: The Last Airbender was able to get away with that, so why not? Anyway, Omi is tied with water. Raimundo is tied to air, or wind as they say in the show. Clay, his name's a bit of a hint, he's tied to earth. And Kimiko is tied to fire. So these four, being these some form or another of chosen ones, have to go out and be the ones to collect the Shengong Wu, even though there are a number of adults hanging around who vastly outnumber them in experience and would seem the much more reasonable choices to deal with this situation. But we can't have that level of logic now, can we? And okay, I know I'm being overly hard on the show, and I do mean everything I'm saying here in good fun. But anyway, the first episode really is just sort of mostly setting up the stage that these kids have to go out there and get these magical items that belong to the great ancient kung fu master before they fall into the hands of Jack Spicer and Wu Yen. Now, what happens is if they get to one of these items and they both basically reach it at the same time, which is something that happens roughly pretty much in both episodes, they may challenge one another to a Xiaolin Showdown. And basically, what happens when it goes on is both parties agree to the showdown. The magical item in question will warp reality around itself to create a very bizarre obstacle course slash challenge area, which honestly seems to be a far greater power than any little bonus that they might bestow on the user who should happen to give them. Like, for example, one of them gets a coin that lets them do incredible acrobatics. Another one is a sash that can go out and grab stuff like it's another hand. There's also a shirt that can turn into a suit of armor, and a little medallion thing that can shoot lightning, and all this other fun stuff. So you can understand why people would want to get their hands on these things. Anyway, the Xiaolin Showdown is basically all or nothing gambling in the same way that a Pokemon battle is a cockfight. But anyway, so basically during this, the good guys will run try and complete the challenge or run the obstacle course, or whatever that particular power item demands that they do in order to get it. And not surprisingly, both times they managed to beat Jack Spicer and Wu Ya, and so yay for the good guys. Now again, if I would have to say that if this is basically what we were going to be seeing every single episode, this would get really old really fast. But I did some checking on this show, and it looks like it certainly doesn't do that. From what I can tell, it looks like they really did put a lot of effort into the writing and all this other stuff. The show, it did end up winning a bunch of Emmys and all this other and such. So it looks like they certainly aren't going to. It's not going to be a formula episode, a formulaic show. Too much. But again, I'm only reviewing the first 2 episodes, and it's not really surprising to me that they do, for the most part, stick with a little bit of a formula. And one of the reasons that they do this, particularly in kids animation, is simply because they operate under the assumption that kids may not necessarily tune in to every single episode. And they don't want to do it so that if a kid misses an episode or 2 and then comes back, they're completely confused as to what's going on. So again, I am poking fun of the show a little bit for all of this. And I won't lie, I am making these Pokemon references just because of the fact that I heard about how they have to collect all of these magical items that belong to the great kung fu master from the past, the words "gotta catch 'em all" did legitimately pop into my mind then. But for all of that, this show does, I think, have quite a bit going for it. First of all, let's talk briefly about some of the actors that are involved here. We have the ever popular Tara Strong coming in as Omi. Of course, we know her as Riku in Final Fantasy X and Bubbles on Powerpuff Girls, and the voice of Ben Tennyson on Ben 10, and just a million other things. With Raimundo, we have, if I recall correctly, Tom Kenny, best known, of course, as SpongeBob SquarePants. He's also Zilius Zox on the Green Lantern, the animated series, and Dr. Octopus on Ultimate Spider-Man. So here's him doing something, a little bit out of his what he's best known for. We, of course, also have Gray DeCelie. I keep wanting to call her Delise, even though I know that's not how you say her name. Anyway, she is, of course, as I routinely as I always mention whenever I bring her up, she is, of course, Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender, Daphne in just about everything Scooby-Doo in the last several years, and again, just another one of those voice actresses that seems to turn up in just about everything, but that's cool because she's really good. Another person that we have, who a lot of folks might know, is playing Master Feng, at least this season, according to my research, is none other than Rene Auberjois, who is, of course, best known as Odo on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. He was the head scientist at Project Cadmus, who created Superboy on Young Justice. And he's also, of course, Mr. House in Fallout New Vegas. I loved him here. That is such a great game. So, oh yeah, I almost forgot. We have another character that I almost forgot, and to an actor I want to talk about, and that is the character of Dojo. And Dojo is a little dragon thing most of the time, who was the pet / buddy of the original Kung Fu guy. He helped the guy hide all of the treasures all over the world, and apparently kind of got fuzzy about where they all ended up. Whatever. And his job is to serve as he's the car. Whenever the kids need to go somewhere, he turns from a little tiny dragon that is in no way, shape, or form reminiscent of the little dragon from Mulan. He turns into a big dragon, he flies them wherever they need to go, and then he immediately turns back into a little dragon, even though having a big, dangerous dragon would, of course, be enormously helpful. But no, he just turns back into a little tiny dragon so that, the kids could do all the fighting. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go with that. Anyway, his name is Dojo, and I won't lie, that being his name really does kind of make me want to roll my eyes because, oh yeah, it's a kung fu show, and a dojo is what they call a training hall in Japan. Yeah. Okay, that's very clever. Oh wait, no, it's not. Anyway, he is voiced, of course, by Wayne Knight, who folks will know best as Newman on Seinfeld, and the fat guy who got eaten by the velociraptors in Jurassic Park. So all of these folks do a really great job there with their roles, and I don't really think there needs to be any more said than that. These are all very experienced actors, very talented actors, and every last one of them is doing a really nice job. But let's keep continuing on, and let me give you some of my basic impressions of most of the characters that we're dealing with here. First of all, we have Omi. As I said before, he kind of considers himself to be the most well trained of everybody, and thinks that all the other kids should immediately fall into line and listen to him. And while Omi does have talent, he's just nowhere near as talented as he thinks he is. And from having grown up in a monastery, he's very lacking in social skills, doesn't really understand a lot of what's going on in the modern world. So it's really not understand. It's really pretty easy to understand why the other kids don't particularly take his desire to automatically be the leader seriously. But I do like how they very quickly sort of fall into being friends and kind of riffing on each other in a friendly way, but also being willing to compliment Omi when he does a good job on stuff. So I thought that they did establish a very good dynamic with him and the other kids quickly. Raimundo, as I said, he just seems to mostly be interested in his own comfort, his own amusement. He likes to riff on people a lot, but when things start to get serious, like in the second episode where they're stuck, he's the one who goes and generally gets the most upset about the fact that they are helpless to do anything about their situation. And it is kind of interesting that he goes from being the guy who doesn't really seem to care to be seemingly being the guy who is most concerned about what's happening. Kimiko, as I said, she does seem to be a rather spoiled person. She's constantly mentions her dad. She's always yakking on the phone with her friends, but she does seem to be fairly good natured. She's willing to compliment Omi when he does well. She comforts him when he gets freaked out over something, and just seems to be. I think spoiled sweet would sort of be an apt description. Clay. Now, one problem that I did have with the first episode is out of everybody on the show, in the first episode, Clay is the one who leaves the weakest impression. And I think the writers understood that because essentially the second episode is where we really get to look at Clay as a character more seriously. And it's actually a very effective episode. We get to see that he's a very deliberate person. He likes to think about what he wants to do and take his time. And while this may kind of make the others sort of riff on him, treat him like he's slow, they even call him an old man, tell him that he's acting like an old man. While he does do that, he's also pretty good at thinking outside the box. And this pays off really more than once in episode 2. So while he just sort of looks like your sort of big dumb looking guy in a cowboy costume, he's obviously a lot more intelligent than he would seem at first glance. And I do like that. That speaks well of the show that right there at the very beginning, they are showing us that these characters do have depth. Now, let's move on and talk briefly about our villains. One that we get in the second episode, and we don't really get to see a whole much of, is Le Mime, who is an evil mime with the power to trap people in invisible boxes and, other evil mime-related things. Seeing as how he doesn't get the chance to talk, not surprisingly, I don't really have very much to say about him as a character, other than I don't particularly have anything against mimes. So I have to disagree with the little make a joke and then everybody laughs at the end thing where Clay says, one thing, well, we learned that everyone hates mimes. I don't know. That's sort of drawing from a really cliche and honestly not all that funny if you ask me. But let's look at our real major villains here that I've already mentioned. Of course, we have Wuya, who in her normal humanish form that we saw in the Ancient Eyes was sort of kind of ancient, slightly gothy witch chick. Now she's sort of a purple ghost wearing a weird mask who talks with a voice that strangely reminds me of Rita Repulsa from the first season of the U.S. Power Rangers show. And then we have Johnny Spicer, who has to go for who probably should win an award for least intimidating supervillain name that I have heard in a very, very long time. On the other hand, to be completely fair, it probably took a while for Lex Luthor to build up some street cred just by going by his name. Actually, though, even though I'm kind of making fun of him, Johnny, I think, is actually my favorite character so far on the show. Mostly just because he seems like a little as if you took a little bit of Scott Evil from the Austin Powers movies and mixed them with Red Mist from the movie Kick-Ass, and then tossed them in a blender together, only the blender is a Hot Topic store. I had the feeling that something like Johnny would come out. Now, for for his flaws, his main flaw, of course, being that he likes to gloat, and you know, he even makes it a point that you should gloat before you have achieved victory, which of course bites him in the butt. He is actually reasonably competent as a villain. He's a technological genius, has big army of robot minions at his disposal, and even though it's just him, his robots, and the ghost of a dead witch, he does seem to be pretty adept at giving the characters a run for their money. Although, for a teen technological genius, he for some reason thought it would be a good idea to put a very big, very obvious, and very prominent on-off switch on his robots on the back of their necks, where the heroes can not only easily see them, but easily deactivate them. Yeah, I think that would definitely count as some poor planning on Johnny's part. And let's see here. So, but still, he is quite entertaining as a villain, and I get the impression that there is a decent story in regards to his origin, where he comes from, what his deal is, and all of this. Now, as I said, I have done a little bit of research on the show, so I do actually understand the basics idea of what's going on with him. But again, I'm mostly speaking to what the feelings I get from having just watched these 2 episodes. So, in regards to Johnny, my feeling is I do enjoy this character. He's a fairly good villain, and I'm curious to see more about what his deal is. Let me see here. One little complaint that I do have was at the very end of the 2nd episode. Wait, did I call him Johnny? Jeez, his name is Jack. Well, folks, once again, my ability to screw up names rears its ugly head yet again. So anyway, at the end of all of this, the kids defeat Jack Spicer, and they get their little magic talisman, and then they just go home. They leave the main bad guy, who has at this point twice tried to take one of the magic talismans, or Shen Gong Wu's, or whatever you want to call them, and they just leave him here. They don't make any effort whatsoever to say, I don't know, take him back to the monastery where they could lock him up, or to try and get any sort of useful information out of him, or do anything to convince him to, you know what, you should really stop hanging out with the evil witch spirit. No good will come of it. No, the heroes just take their prize and go home. That seems like remarkably poor planning on the part of our heroes. Now, again, I know I'm probably putting way too much thought into what is undeniably a kid's show, but I would be remiss as a viewer if I did not point this out. So, let me see. Nope, I think that pretty much covers everything that I have to say about this show. So, all in all, what is my overall impression? My overall impression is that these 2 episodes just suffer from the fact that they're the first 2 episodes of a show. A lot of the time has to be spent on exposition and setting things up, setting up the basic premise of the show. So we don't really get to dive into the characters and things like that very much. However, they do set things up for what I would say is a fairly solid, reasonably interesting show. Now the question is, am I going to watch more of this? And my answer is maybe. Now, it's not that I dislike the show. I actually think it seems to be pretty decent. But just what I've seen from these 2 episodes, I don't have that feeling that, oh wow, I really can't wait to see what happens next. This to me is more like if I was flipping through the channels and this show and happened to come across this show, sure, I'd stop and watch it, but I really wouldn't schedule time out of my day to make sure that I watched it. And that's an important and critical difference. But that said, I still think this is a show that if you enjoy Western animation, if you like good action shows, give this show a couple of episodes. Give it a try. I think it would appeal to a lot of people out there. Anyway, that's all I have for this episode. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter as Who's Your Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.